This is the beginning of podcast 2 for chapter 6 on developing and maintaining a learning environment. The teaching and learning process is otherwise known as an ecological system where management and content are interdependent. You can prevent behavior problems through both management and content. Order in physical education means high levels of engagement, not just being busy, happy, and good. When students are busy and happy and good, they might be on task, but are they learning something from your lesson? Many physical education classes, particularly at the secondary level, show students that are busy and working on a task, but they may not be learning something. We also think of order in physical education as being low levels of inappropriate or disruptive behavior. As was mentioned in the last podcast, the first podcast, you need to develop your own management system that's specific for your classes. Of course, schools have their own management system and rules that define the school rules and procedures that you have to adhere to. And an example of that is at your placement sites with your mentor teacher, you have to use their behavior system. But hopefully, through using their behavior system and the school rules that they have to go by, you'll be able to pick and choose what you think works well for you, and you might be able to use that on your own. You need to develop your own unique management system for physical education, and that consists of two major things: organizational patterns and routines for organizing the physical part of your lesson, and the student behavior or rules of conduct that you are having as expectations in your classes. Routines are the way that we manage the physical parts of the lesson. How to manage students and how to manage equipment and how to manage entering and leaving the gymnasium and so on. We have locker room routines: when to enter and exit the locker room, how long they're going to get to be in the locker room. A lot of teachers on the secondary level put up a time of 5 minutes or 4 minutes on the scoreboard clock, and then the scoreboard buzzes when the time is up and they all have to be out there in their squads or their places for roll. Before class routines are, of course, things like that and attendance procedures. Lesson related routines are related to what equipment you use that's specific for that lesson and what boundaries you use for out of bounds and where they're not supposed to go when they're practicing. End of lesson routines include the closure, and usually that closure contains assessments of some kind. Then there are other considerations also, like late arrivals, water breaks, when you're going to let them to have water and or go to the bathroom. Teaching, you have to teach the routines to the students, give them practice for that, and also give them non-examples. You want to give them examples of things that they shouldn't do as far as class management goes. The degree of structure depends on um, how much control the teacher is willing to give up. Usually, classes in physical education are teacher structured, but we're trying to get our lessons to be more student structured or student centered and give students more responsibility for their own behavior and for their own learning. You constantly will have to reinforce routines or reteach the routines or remind students about the routines throughout the time that you're teaching them. That's important to remember and to do. Rules, of course, are established to make clear expectations for appropriate behavior, and those rules are general expectations for behavior, not specific ones. There's a listing there of basic rules in physical education. When others are talking, we try not to talk, be supportive of our classmates, and so on. Those basic rules or class rules that you have for your classes need to be posted on the wall in the gymnasium, and they need to be posted in two different languages. We need to have the rules visible so students are able to see them. Those rules are so general that they can be applied to many situations, and you have to teach the students what the rules mean in a variety of situations using positive and negative behavior examples. Gaining student cooperation is one way to prevent behavior problems. Again, as you develop your own management system, remember that student management is learned. There are no bad or good students. There are just people who have bad or good behaviors. Stages of development in the gymnasium, there are different emphases at different levels according to behavior. I've only listed here stage 3 and 4, even though the textbook also has stage 1 and 2, but that's for the elementary level. Grades 5 to 9, or middle school, obviously peer group relationships are very important to these students. They have a tendency to question authority, and they get attention through humor, disruptive remarks, and horseplay. But getting to know the students very well and gaining their cooperation at the middle school level is important. After grade 9, they return to an academic orientation. Social and emotional development usually becomes more stable. Do listen to reason a little bit more, and management generally takes a little less time at the high school level. They are more worried about social things at the high school level. You need to teach student behavior as if it's a new motor skill. Don't assume that students know how to behave. You have to have your rules, and you have to teach those rules to your students. Positive is more effective than negative as far as behavior consequences or behavior management. You don't want to become adversarial with students. Inappropriate behavior should not be personally threatening to the student. In other words, don't take it personally. You can be caring and concerned and still have high expectations for student behavior and respond firmly as you always need to do. Remember that they are not bad people. Don't take it personally. It may not have anything to do with what you are doing in your class or what your class is about for that day. Is that will not most likely be the reason for student behavior problems. Know what you expect of students ahead of time. You have to be consistent in how you deal with good management of student behavior. But consistency is a critical aspect of that, and you can't be consistent unless you've decided ahead of time what your expectations are for student behavior. And you can't be consistent if you haven't anticipated some of the things that might happen in your class, like students talking or students hitting each other or insulting each other or whatever. If you anticipate the behavior problems ahead of time, that's half the battle. You need to share with students your expectations for behavior and help them internalize appropriate behavior. Teach social skills about working with others in tasks. Management is an ongoing process that we are constantly having to deal with in physical education. But if you don't have the management or control of the class, you're not going to be able to teach. In physical education, we want to go beyond mere compliance with rules and doing what the teacher says. We want to try to put the responsibility on the student for their own behavior. Physical education contributes to affective goals. We have two of them in our national standards. We do teach towards social skills. So it's important to make sure that we try to teach students to be more responsible for their behavior. Students have unprecedented freedom and choice in their lives, and they need to learn how to make choices, good choices for behavior, to have happy lives later on also. Teachers should help students become more self-directed, responsible, and caring people, but it does take a lot of class time, and you have to help them become more self-directed in that way. Hellison's levels of personal and social responsibility is unique to physical education, by the way. Um, Don Hellison is a physical education, teacher education professor at the University of Chicago. It describes a system of moving from lower to higher levels of responsibility and creating an awareness of appropriate behaviors with the students. The first four levels are pretty much lower levels of behavior management or student control. but each level moves closer to students taking on responsibility or being more self-directed. Behavior modification is also a way to deal with student behavior problems. It is based on the idea of reinforcement or rewards of positive responses and consequences or deterrents for negative responses. In behavior modification, you define the behavior explicitly. In other words, what is appropriate and what's not appropriate behavior in your class. It does take time to teach appropriate behavior and describe situations where students have choices. In behavior modification, we want to try and reinforce positive responses. And sometimes we ignore inappropriate behavior in some cases if it's not disruptive to others. Minor bad behavior can be ignored as long as it doesn't escalate into a major problem. We also need to exhibit appropriate behavior as a teacher. In other words, the saying, do as I say, not as I do, is not appropriate. Teachers have to act as an adult and always act professionally with others, whether they're students or colleagues or other administrators. We also need to encourage reflective skills for students and ask that students evaluate their own behavior in writing, in journals, in exit slips, or some other way so that students are made aware of their own behavior. That's the end of podcast 2 for Chapter 6.